covers architecture, the components that make Archive Attender work. As many of you know, because you've worked closely with the product at customer installations in the past, Archive Attender 3.5 in the earlier versions was a monolithic service product. So we had a single Archive Attender service that was responsible for basically doing everything inside the application, running archiving policies, managing the archive locations, interacting with the console. Just about anything that Archive Attender did was performed through that one service, which, as it turned out over the years, became somewhat of a bottleneck, especially for customers that had more users, wanted to run policies at a greater frequency, and so forth. So one of our main goals in 4 was to address that architectural bottleneck, and I think the guys in the development team have done a nice job with Archive Attender 4. If you take a look at the product today, we still have a familiar console environment. Console is still a Visual Basic.NET application. We took a look at doing this as a web-based console, and we thought we were going to sacrifice too much functionality. So we went back to sort of the full functional client application environment that you're used to, although we have made some changes and streamlined that console to make management a little bit more efficient. First change that you'll notice coming out of the blocks here is we have SQL Server as a requirement for the product today. Now, coming out of the box, we sort of designed this to work with SQL Server Express, so your customers don't need to purchase SQL licenses. SQL Server Express can be downloaded and installed from the Microsoft website. And what we're using the database for is to handle all of the configuration information that we used to store in XML files. So if you're familiar with our backend architecture previously, user information was in an XML, policy information was in an XML, some of the archive information itself, what the GUID was and so forth, was stored in an XML, which was quite functional, but those XML files were prone to either become corrupt. Sometimes administrators would delete them inadvertently and cause problems. So we've moved all of that organizational information from the console, all of the configuration data, into the SQL Server database where we'll maintain it securely. First new component then, after the database layer, is the hub service. So the hub service is the service component that kind of glues together the console with the database. It also brokers all of the database requests that take place throughout the rest of the product. So this is probably 60% of what used to be in the old Archive Attender service is now in the hub service. It handles all of that traffic management, database communication, and so forth. The next service component in the new service architecture layer is an Exchange service. So this is a separate entire service. It's responsible for interacting with the Exchange server mailboxes. It will also interact with PST files for PST import purposes. So this is our MAPI interface layer. Everything that occurs at a MAPI level is going to occur through the Exchange service. And then the third service component is an archive service. Archive service does pretty much exactly what it says it does. It interacts with the archive locations. So when it comes to writing archive data, accessing archive data, updating indexes for the archives, that is handled by the archive service. Both the archive service and the Exchange service communicate back through the hub to get information from the database and so forth. But there's also an option that allows the Exchange service to communicate directly with the archive service. And that happens predominantly through policy execution. As the Exchange service, for example, tags a message to be archived, it will communicate that back to the archive service. They can pick it up, write it to the archive location, and so forth. Now, the interesting thing about the architecture here is you can notice from sort of the multiple gears for the Exchange and archive services is that these can be distributed. So you're no longer limited to just a 3-service core architecture. What you see on the screen would be a normal deployment. This could still run on a single server, just the way it does today. But when you get into a customer environment where they have 5, 6, 10,000 users, maybe those users are spread across multiple cities, different exchange servers perhaps, and there's WAN connectivity that might be limited between those locations, we can deploy multiple instances of the Exchange and Archive service in those remote locations. So maybe we've got a main installation here in the Pittsburgh area where we're located, and if we had a San Diego office, we could have an Archive and Exchange service in San Diego that would handle archiving to the Exchange server environment in that office, write the archives locally in that office, but still be managed from the central hub instance here at Pittsburgh where the administrators might be. So that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of deployment scenarios and the ability to sort of scale up the food chain for larger customers and be able to support a larger distributive environment. And then finally, from an archive architecture point of view, we do have still the HTTP layer of the product, which is pretty much unchanged from what you're used to. So we're still going to require IIS be installed where the hub service is located, and we're going to use that to route requests from your Outlook users to be able to look up archive data and search archive data just the way we do today. So that's a quick recap of some of the core changes in the architecture. Just a technical note for those of you that dive a little bit deeper, all of these service components are being glued together with the Microsoft WCF framework. So that's the underlying communications protocol that holds all of the services together, facilitates communication, and predominantly we're using the WCF binary protocols to be able to handle those kinds of communication between the processes. So given that change to the service layer, we had to come up with some changes in the console to be able to reflect the new service architecture. What you see on the screen right now is a view of the main console screen, and you'll notice this has been facelifted sort of on the right-hand side of the screen where we used to have the service information at the top and the start and stop button and so forth. We now have a service pane that displays information about all of the running services. So you can see at a glance what's going on with a particular service component. There's also, I'll show you during the demo phase, there's a tier at the bottom of the pane here that will allow you to access logs and recent activity at each one of the services. As you notice on the right, this pane will scroll, so if you've got multiple Exchange and Archive services, you can scroll down and get a view of what's going on with the different services. In addition to that sort of entry view to the console, we've also done a few other changes to the console environment. We've tried to regroup the information to make it a little bit easier for new administrators to understand. All of the configuration data for example, is now located at the top under one link. That allows them to set up information about their services, enter licenses, manage templates for their users. We'll talk about that in a few moments. We've got search information kind of organized at the bottom, so everything's in a nice, consistent tree fashion. We've also, in that same vein, gone ahead and renamed some of the options that are really confusing for new users in the product. So what used to be called auto-aging is now called stub aging, since what it does is changes the behavior of stubs over time. People had a very difficult time with that one. We renamed the old dummy user option to legacy users. As you know, dummy users were users who did not have a valid Active Directory account, typically historical users who were importing PST data for, and we felt legacy users was a much more appropriate term, a lot more understandable. And user search views have now been renamed as delegated searches. That's kind of how people thought of them. How do I delegate the ability for a manager to be able to search his user employee archives and so forth? So delegated searches seem to make a lot more sense there. Moving on in terms of product changes, we've added some information behind the scenes to pull us a little bit tighter into the Active Directory environment. So you'll notice here when you set up a domain in Archive Attender 4, you can specify a search order for multi-domain environments. Where do I look first to get information updates on domain changes? We've also added the option to keep users in sync and also groups of users in sync. That means the service will go out, periodically pull the Active Directory, and pull that information over any of those changes, maybe Exchange mailbox, for example, that sort of thing, into the archive attender environment for synchronization. We did support this kind of functionality before, but it was hidden in those automated searches, and it was a little more difficult to explain to people. In that same vein, we've gotten rid of the whole concept of groups. In Archive Attender 3.5, you had to create groups or use the default group, and then you added a user to a group, which worked fine, except it was rather limiting. A user could only be in one group at a time. If you applied policies to that group, every member of the group got the same policy, and it became a little bit more restrictive as you started to look at larger numbers of users and more diverse types of policies that you wanted to apply. So we've changed that concept to a view, and you can create views on the fly. You can add users to a view, which is just a logical grouping of users in Archive Attender. You can apply policies at the view level. So you could have policies apply to one view with certain users and another view with other users. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen here in this shot, there are some system-maintained views. So we wanted people to have the ability, for example, to see all of their mailbox users or see all of their users that are in sync. So those will be present out of the box, and then other views will be able to be created as the domain admins add members to Archive Attender. Switching gears for a minute from the console side of the application to the user view, we've redesigned the user search interface in Archive Attender 4. I think the design team did a nice job with this. As you know, in the past we had sort of the archive search view, then we had a link for the folder view. It was kind of confusing. They were two separate UIs. They looked different. We've combined those now into one search view. So on the left-hand side of the pane, you'll see your folder structure where you have archive data. In the middle of the pane, you'll see the messages for the folder that you happen to be in at that particular moment in time. You can perform a search against that folder. You can search against all folders in your view. You can click on a message, the hyperlinks here, to be able to see the message preview. And of course, you can continue to open it in an Outlook or a web view the way we historically have. We also have the options to restore a message or delete it from the archive. So functionality is pretty much the same as we had previously, but we've tried to make it a little bit more friendly for the users to be able to navigate. This search will now be launched. You can still create the folder in their Outlook data store, but when it launches, it's going to launch as a separate web browser window. That was primarily due to Outlook's restrictions in terms of the way it's rendering HTML, so we felt that it was better to just pop them out to a web browser view. Along those same lines, we redesigned the delegated search view to be consistent. So this is what used to be the old user searches. If you give a manager a delegated search view now, when they click on that link, they'll see the name of the search view at the top. They'll see the individual users whose data they can view on the left-hand side of the pane. Before, all of those results were mixed together. So they could see, in this example, Kirk's results and Cleaver's results, but they were sort of intermixed in the middle of the screen. Now they're clearly separated, so they can choose to look at results for both of those users or dive into one particular user's information. So for the first time, we're also introducing an Outlook add-in for the product. It's been a long time in coming. I think the guys have done a nice job with it. We need to do a bit more testing with this, but it's looking pretty good from the initial view. We'll take a look at it live in a couple of moments here. We envision this to be an optional component, so customers who use Archive Attender in the 3.5 environment and just use stub links or the archive search can certainly continue to use that paradigm. We're not going to force them to change. If they want a bit more integrated experience, they can opt to purchase the Outlook plugin, we'll offer this as an additional component to the software application. At some point here in the next few weeks, Steve will be getting you some pricing information about how the Outlook add-in will be priced. It will function with Outlook 2007 and 2010. Does a couple of things from a user point of view. You'll notice over here the icons are now modified to let the user know when they're looking at their mailbox this is an archived message as opposed to a mail item that has not been archived. We'll be doing seamless retrieval of stubbed messages here in the preview pane. So you can see up at the top here, this indicates this was an archived message and the original message content is what you're viewing. We'll also be able to search through Outlook. There'll be a Sherpa archive search. I'll show this to you in the demo, where they can perform a search that will look at both archived and archived content in one search result for them right in their Outlook box. So a nice option for people that want a bit more integrated experience than what the traditional product has offered. Okay, so let's take a look at Archive Attender 4. I'm going to try to get out to one of my VMs here. And here's the Archive Attender console, as I showed you in sort of the preview pane on the slide deck. And you'll notice these two panes scroll up and down. So if I want to look at my logs and recent activity, I can click at the bottom. I've got sort of a running narrative here on the right-hand side of the screen that shows me what my services have been doing recently. I can access a log file just by clicking on it right here in the list, or I can go back to my service panel and see the overview. I can also click on an individual service to get installation information, what version is it running, when was it installed, and so forth. You'll notice as we go down through the console, because we're doing multiple services now, several of the things that you're used to looking at in the old product have a service flavor to them. So for example, in configuration now, we can set up configuration parameters for each of the services. So this is some of the old information that would have been under the main console where we can, for example, turn on debug, logging, set archiving parameters, specify a CAS server, those kinds of things, default URLs. Licenses get plugged in right from under the configuration tab. User templates can be created here. Templates are a way to set up a set of default values that a user or a user view will inherit. So you can have templates that, for example, turn on the archive search capability and maybe allow the user to be able to restore or delete information from their archive search view. Can create that as a template and then assign that template dynamically to users as they're added from Active Directory, and they'll automatically inherit those options that are defined in the template. I mentioned the fact that we have a little tighter Active Directory integration in the product now. So that's what happens in the Domain tab here. This is where you would define the various domain servers that you want to be able to attach to. And when you bring up one of those servers, you'll get a list of the groups. You can go down and pick typically the user group. We'll show you a mix of the users and groups on the system, and we can filter this down to see perhaps just users or just groups. And either one of these can be selected and added directly into the Archive Attender application. So we can add this Active Directory group, and it will pull over all of the members from the AD group, put them into the Archive Attender configuration. If we mark this update box, it's going to keep those users in sync. So as the AD group changes, those changes are going to be synced to Archive Attender, new members that have left the group, and so forth. And here's where we can specify our template. So we can go ahead and assign our sales department template to this group, or we even have the option to build a new template on the fly if we want a particular template for this group. That will actually get our users added to the configuration. Let me get back to my user view here for a moment. If I scroll down, you'll notice as users get added, we indicate that to the administrator with a little checkbox component here so they know this user is already present in the configuration. Once that happens, I'm going to jump down the tree for just one link here. Once that happens, they'll show up then in the email stores view. And this is where we define those views that I was telling you about earlier. So I've got a Sherpa test group view. I've got my onboard views that are built by the system by default. So I can click on my view for mailbox users and see this is where my Kirk user shows up. So this replaces the old group information in Archive Attender 3.5. The archive panel itself is pretty much the same as what you're used to seeing in terms of the archive location view. Main difference is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the screens now have a server or a service column on them, so you can see which Archive Attender server is managing this particular archive location, since now we might have multiple archive locations. Policy information is under the management area of the console. So we've got our regular policies. We've got our stub aging policies. Policies have not changed very much at all. We did modify the UI to make it a little bit more understandable. So we've got the navigation pane down the left. And as you move across the navigation, you get the changes reflected on the right-hand side of the screen for your current location in the pane. But in terms of the options that you specify and the way we perform archiving, almost exactly the same as in 3.5. The one difference here is within the policy itself now we can select targets. Who's the policy going to apply to? Those targets can either be an individual user or they can be a view. So as I create views, like my Sherpa test group, I can add this policy to the entire view. And it will apply to every member in the view then. Policies still run on a scheduled basis. Everything there is pretty much the same. Log files is another one of those areas where the main change here is we've updated the screen to be able to reflect different services. So I can look at my archive service on AA40RIC, my exchange service. If I had 3 or 4 additional services, they'd show in the drop-down. I can do some filtering on those logs. Various status conditions show all tasks, show only tasks with errors, and so forth. I can do some time filtering so I can show what's happened over the last month, over the last 24 hours, and so forth. And then down in the search, we've got the traditional archive search. So these are the searches that you're used to. If we start an archive search, date criteria, scope criteria, and so forth. You can save the search, and you'll be able to execute a save search by clicking on this button. So that used to be a little more difficult from an administrator point of view, so we can easily get to save searches. And we also have the delegated searches now, which are those manager search views that we talked about on the slide deck. From a user point of view, let me just show you quickly. Actually, we'll do one of these delegated searches. If we do the delegated search in a web browser, this is the way it would pop up for the administrator that actually owns the search. So you can see here, I can look at Theodore's results. I can look at Wallace's results. Or I could do a search against both of those sets of results and get messages back for both users. And when those search results are rendered, I know who they belong to, so I've got them imported a lot of the same data for both of these guys, so the search results look a lot alike, but you can get the idea here that I'm organizing them by user. As I mentioned, this will show a little snapshot view of the message, so we can do sort of that message preview by clicking the text link, or we can go ahead and open it up in Outlook the way we traditionally have. Pick a profile, and we'll just pop that message out. This is an interesting little sidelight for those of you that have used the product for a while. Let me see if we can get an Outlook session here. Actually, let's see. I'll pick somebody that's got some 4.0 archive data. When I look at an archive message, I've got my stub link, and when I click on the stub link, the message gets retrieved, but we no longer put up the interim Internet Explorer window. I know it's been a long time in trying to get rid of that, but now we render just the retrieved message, no additional IE windows lingering at the bottom of the screen. So that's something that'll make a lot of people happy, one of those little nagging problems. So that's a view of sort of the traditional archiving environment using stub links or archive search and so forth. Let me just shell out of the PowerPoint here for a minute and see if we can get to a machine with my Outlook plugin. So this is a mailbox in Outlook 2007. It's got some archive messages. These are normal messages you see at the top. Got the regular Outlook icons associated with them. But if I scroll to the bottom of this user's folder, I'm now looking at archive messages. I know that because the icon has been modified to reflect an archived email. My stub link retrieval has happened seamlessly in the preview pane. I can opt to close this if I still want to see the stub. You can see that it's there, but I do have the retrieve view. If I go to my tools area, I now have the archive search. This would provide the combined searching component for archive and unarchived data. So I can set my search parameters here. You can see there's a number of filters, keywords, sender recipient, and so forth. I can search all folders. I can search archive data only or mixed results. And if I click the search button for my metrics keyword, it goes out, parses through that data. Still takes a while to load all this. This isn't the fastest VM in the world, but you can see now I've got a set of mixed search results. So I've got the keyword metrics occurring in unarchived messages here as well as archived messages. That's a little bit of a quick peek at the Outlook add-in functionality. Let's talk about a couple of things that might be important to you, to your existing customers. From a standpoint of how do we get from 3.5 to 4.0, there is a conversion utility. So it's a chance for you guys to wrap some professional services around helping customers make this migration, if you wish to do that. The main component of the conversion is taking all of that existing XML information, user XML, policy XML, and so forth, delegated search XMLs, and converting those over into the SQL Server database. So from a service point of view, you could wrap some an engagement around helping them install SQL Server, configure it, running the conversion, making sure the environment gets ported over correctly. The conversion utility will also update their web components to the new 4.0 AA web component information. For customers that want to move to the Outlook add-in, there's sort of an optional conversion step, if you will, to facilitate that modified icon I showed you on the Outlook view, the one where the little Sherpa icon shows on the envelope. We've actually added a mapping message class field to the archive data. So if you want to preload that for your customers, there will be a conversion routine that will go through their archive data and allow you to modify that message class just to reflect the modified icon. That is the only change, or the only potential change, to customers who have existing archive data. We purposely did not change the format and structure of the archive data, so our customers were not faced with a large data conversion task when they implemented 4.0. The other note is you might want to ask your customers if they're doing anything with public folders. At this point in the product life cycle, we're acknowledging the fact that Microsoft is moving away from public folder support and Exchange, and we've deprecated public folder archiving from Archive Attender 4.0. That means if they have public folder information already archived, they can continue to access that, but they won't be able to archive any additional public folder content in the Archive 4.0 world. So just one more slide, and then we'll turn over to some questions here, try to answer any questions you have about 4.0. We do have a new product video available. So if you've got an Archive Attender prospect, you can direct them to this YouTube link or go just to the Sherpa YouTube channel to be able to see the Archive Attender product video. Marketing team did a nice job with getting these professionally produced, and I think they do a great job in 4 or 5 minutes of giving a prospective customer a walkthrough of what Archive Attender is all about, how it works, and what it looks like. There's also going to be, for existing customers, an Archive Attender What's New video, which recaps some of the content that we covered during the session today. I believe as a follow-up to today's session, you'll be getting an email with a link to that What's New video and the slide deck that we're using today. So those will be some of the follow-up resources available to you. So that's a quick recap. I hope that was helpful, and let me find out from the organizers here if we have any questions. Yeah? Okay. Looks like we don't have anything preloaded, guys. If you have anything that you would like to fire out from the question pane, now's a good time to do that. Okay, somebody wants to know, is the data still in the original .msg format? And that is correct. We have not modified the way we're storing the archive data, so we're still using the flat file architecture. We still have the map index. We still have the compressed .msg file. So no real changes on that front. Next question is this version compatible to run on Windows 7 Pro? Yes. I'm doing some testing on a Windows 7 desktop, so you should be good to go there. Be able to view Archive Attender over HTTPS RPC when using Outlook remotely with the Outlook plugin. Don't know the answer to that, Rick. That's something that I'm going to have to take to the development team, so I'm not sure if that has any bearing on it or not. 64-bit Windows 7, yes, we are going to have some 64-bit components for Archive Attender. However, anything that we're doing with MAPI access is still going to be 32-bit. So when the Exchange service does its calls to the MAPI environment, we're still going to be making 32-bit calls there. Discovery Attender will still integrate with Archive Attender. That was one of the questions in the chat room here. Can the upgrade be run in place? Yes, and as a matter of fact, for the upgrade utility, you will need to have the upgrade run on an existing Archive Attender 3.5 service because we pull some information from the registry. We're looking for some configuration data that's stored underneath the program folders. So that's going to be an important part of the conversion. When will clients be informed? We're doing client webinars actually this afternoon and Thursday of this week. In terms of a schedule, I hope to go to beta with some select customers next week or at the very latest the following week. with an eye towards having a release perhaps early December, providing the beta testing goes well. You know, there's so many different configurations and real-world scenarios out there. It's hard to duplicate it all in the lab. So we've been doing extensive testing the last few months with the product as we're finalizing development. But I really want to get it out with some live archive attender customers who have a larger number of users and larger archives to see how it handles under stress and if there's any issues we haven't uncovered. What version of SQL is supported? SQL Server Express is sort of the gateway or entry-level version. You will be able to attach to an existing SQL environment if your customers have one. I have to verify that SQL 2005 will work for that. I know we can attach to an existing SQL 2008 environment, and I have to validate whether SQL 2005 is compatible there for you. Great. Well, I think that's all I had today. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you so much for taking time to join. And feel free to email me directly or Steve directly if you have follow-up questions for things we didn't address. Thanks, everyone.